PA, sorry, nanokata acting PA year 2. So permanent speaker. Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, me apologize. So me asking Honorable Minister of giving me one plan answers and Eastern Islands by expecting one time by expecting Nupla PA. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Minister of Public Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the good member for Daulo for a very important question on behalf of the people of Eastern Highlands and also the provincial administration there. I'd like to firstly convey my New Year greetings belated to you on behalf of all the public servants in Papua New Guinea and also the people of Nuku. Mr. Speaker, the situation with the Eastern Highlands Provincial Administration is that the term has expired for the current provincial administrator, and the submission is ready for NEC to deliberate on and appoint the permanent provincial administrator for Eastern Highlands. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Member of Long, Kuniwa Gembok.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is in relation to the proposed population census update that the PM, our Prime Minister's advised that will be conducted this year. Now, Papua New Guinea today does not know the exact number of population it has. The last national population census was conducted in 2011, which had the population at about 7 million. Now, recently, a United Nations report estimated that our population is at 17 million. That's a huge jump, and we don't know exactly whether we have 10 million or 17 million people in the country. The Prime Minister has indicated that we will conduct the national census this year in 2023. So my first question to the National Planning Minister is that when do we expect the national census exercise to commence? This year, if we can confirm to the House and the people of this country. Now, do we have a budget for this exercise to be carried out? My third question is, before we commence on the new exercise to update our population, can we look into NSO? We know that 200 million has been spent for the NID project in this country, and to that, there's no investigation that's been done, and no results have been produced to inform the country as to how we expended the 200 million. So before we commence on the 2023 census, can the Minister inform this House and the country how we will go about investigating NSO to establish some facts before we go into the new exercise? Thank you.
Honorable Minister of Planning.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, True. We thank you, Member Blow, Kundewa Gambok, for these very important 3 questions in relation to census and the need for an investigation into NSO, and at the same time, the status of an investigation into what has been the NID program. Mr. Speaker, as you would understand, census, when we wanted to conduct last year and the previous year, while work were ongoing, we were affected by COVID-19. And because of COVID, census, as you'd understand, requires a lot of people to be on the ground, physically checking and doing those census work, especially in districts, LLGs, ward areas. So at the time when we were capping down on the movement of people, we were not able to do that exercise. Thus, we said we'd defer to this year for us to do a more concrete and a very good census program. In terms of budget, Mr. Speaker, we have budgeted for the census this year, and I thank Parliament for the support and especially Cabinet in allocating 70 million kina for the census work this year. Though that is not enough for the work, we are happy that development partners have also come on board and they will support us in the census program. So that will be undertaken this year, but from support we're getting from bilateral partners and our development partners as well, we are able to do a more smarter approach to the census, such as using innovative technology and such as radio sensing and all the other technologies that is available now for us to do a more effective census program for this year. And Cabinet has taken an approach, and through the Office of Prime Minister and PM and NEC were able to put together a committee which is basically composed of NSO, PM's department, multi-task departments, and at the same time provincial governments will also be involved in the process. District governments, district agencies such as implementing agencies such as DDAs will be involved, council presidents, ward recorders, the whole of government throughout the government structure will be involved in trying to do a more concrete census for this year so that we can put to rest the numbers that seem to be floating around between 10 million and 17 or 16 million, as highlighted by my Vice Minister for National Planning and member for Chuave. So in relation to census, yes, we will start this year, and we're taking it as a matter of priority for this government, knowing that once we understand the population, we'll be able to plan more smartly given the population numbers. In terms of NID, I think most of us are aware of this issue with NID when the previous government started this program, and not to comment on anything, but we're trying to improve the process and the projects that we have within the NID. And now under the wisdom of our Prime Minister, NID has become a program that internal security in terms of monitoring people and getting them to be Kisimol register and movement of people. It comes under a joint leadership between Prime Minister's leadership, the internal security, and myself taking carriage of planning. So in terms of the investigation, now ongoing work, I think that deserves a question of its own, which I will not go into. But in terms of NSO, yes, this year, given that we need to do serious work with the census that's coming, starting this year, we will ensure that there's been some things happening, but at the same time, this census program will also give us the opportunity to dissect the entire organization and at the same time see what we can do in terms of us going forward. Mr. Speaker, may thank him. Question will come. Thank you.
Honorable Governor Blomanus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question Blomi by me asking Minister of Law, Immigration, I believe Honorable Deputy Prime Minister to look out in this law ministry. Question Blomi pass law. Processing center before staff law is Loringao. I ask him this question plenty time now. Seek him information, but me no overlook some clear information to mass law display. When I'm time through by Ministry of Law, it transfer him look up law facilities. Law is Loringao by go law handle higher education. Former Minister of Law Education, higher education, it took also by taking him 1 week. Now you become law new election finish. This facilities are important law. It like come up a technical school law manus. Minister enough you talking one time by this transfer by come up. Iglo higher education. Now suppose you got problem on them higher education, manage provincial government too, like by transfer command and it long. But suppose you got some like issues you pass on them display. Please enough you talk sabe one them issues or one time by you sort them out issue so that display technical college where manus got thinking long the time by start kick up inside the display. Thank you. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Miletok, thank you. Question, important question. Governor Blomanus, he asked him long regarding this very important institution that they want transferred. Yes, this facility been sinarani need immigration. Now, I would like to assure the good governor of Manus that I will check all the relevant facts and ensure that I get back to him as soon as possible with a definite answer instead of give him kind answer about flow of parliament. But me check him good, now but me go back lem with a way forward so me fix him this something once and for all, now give him this facility go manus. Thank you, Drew.
Honorable Member. Question time, Pobla 5 minutes, Emi Kamla Haremlon. Papers. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Labour and Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Drew. Pursuant to stated, I present a treaty document relating to the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019, number 190, and Violence and Harassment Recommendation 2019, number 206. Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the Parliament to make a statement in connection with the treaty.
Is leave granted? Leave granted. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the Honourable House. I'd like to make a ministerial statement for the ratification of the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019. Mr. Speaker, I am honoured as the Deputy Prime Minister and also Minister responsible for labour and employment matters in the country to present to this Honourable House two international instruments that form part of the wider set of international labour standards. These international instruments that I referred to concern the day-to-day confronting and sensitive issues on violence and harassment, including gender-based violence, and may I further state, especially against our women. These international instruments were adopted by 187 member states of the International Labour Organization in June of 2019. Mr. Speaker, that year in June, and through the support of our Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable James Marape, who at the time endorsed 3 members of Parliament, which included Mr. Alfred Manasseh, who was then the Minister for Labour and Industrial Relations, Honourable Dr. Lino Tom, and Mr. Mera Kipefa, to lead Papua New Guinea's tripartite delegation comprising of representatives from the government, the workers' group and the employers' group to join leaders in the world of work at the 108th session of the International Labour Conference in Geneva. Mr. Speaker, it was during this 108th session of the ILO that 187 member states of the International Labour Organization, including Papua New Guinea, deliberated on the sensitive agenda of violence and harassment in the world of work. The conclusions of the deliberations resulted by unanimously voting for the adoption of the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019, number 190, and its accompanying Violence and Harassment Recommendation 2019, number 206. Not a single objection was cast. It was a historic moment where the leaders of the world at work had produced the first ever international standards aimed at ending violence and harassment, including gender-based violence in our world of work. Mr. Speaker, before I proceed to seek that this Honourable House accedes to the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019, may I briefly inform the House that Papua New Guinea, being a member state of the ILO, is also bound by the Constitution of the ILO. Therefore, it is obligatory that adopted instruments must be submitted to the competent authority, which is, of course, this important House, our National Parliament. Mr. Speaker, for that matter, this Honourable House will note the instruments adopted in June of 2019 during the 108th session of the International Labour Conference, which included the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019 and its accompanying recommendation, number 206. Mr. Speaker, on the 12th of June 2021, Mr. Charles Abel, then as Chairman of the Special Parliamentary Committee on Gender-Based Violence, tabled its first report on its inquiry work into the extent of gender-based violence in our country. I commend Mr. Abel, the Honourable Alan Bird, the Honourable Powers Pakov, the Honourable Aya Tambua, Mr. Michael Dua, Dr. Alan Marat, and Mr. Ginson Sauna on the outstanding work of the committee, which had outlined 70 recommendations for immediate actions that calls for holistic efforts towards the eradication of all forms of violence and harassment. Mr. Speaker, I believe we all agree that we can no longer afford to have our women's voices and those of marginalized groups be silenced anymore. Action must be taken to ensure that gender-based violence and harassment is prevented, and when it does occur, those affected can speak up in safety and security and can obtain justice. Mr. Speaker, in the context of gender-based violence, violence and harassment against women in the world of work hampers women empowerment and their access to and progress in the labor market, and its rippling effect can culminate to a large extent. It affects the sustainability of the economy in general and perpetuates occupational gender segregation. Violence and harassment against women are often rooted in unequal gender power dynamics, gender stereotypes, multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, patriarchal values, and historical inequalities between men and women. Mr. Speaker, obviously a transformative cultural shift must start. Mr. Speaker, in the same